If you're watching this right now, you're about to discover something that will fundamentally transform how you understand both God and reality itself. Not through theology, not through faith alone, through quantum physics, the most rigorously tested science we have, revealing what mystics and prophets have been describing for millennia. And what emerges when you see the connection is more profound than either science or religion has been able to articulate separately. This isn't about proving or disproving God's existence. This is about recognizing that quantum physics and ancient wisdom are describing the same underlying reality using different language. When physicists talk about the unified field, quantum entanglement, and consciousness collapsing probability waves, they're describing what spiritual traditions call God, divine consciousness, and creative power. Same reality, different vocabulary. Can you feel the significance of this recognition? That strange sense of pieces clicking together that you didn't know were part of the same puzzle. That's not intellectual excitement. That's your consciousness recognizing truth that transcends both scientific materialism and religious dogma. Because what you're about to understand doesn't require you to abandon science or faith. It reveals that they've been pointing to the same source all along. Here's what quantum physics proves. At the foundation of reality, there's a unified field of infinite potential from which everything emerges. This field is conscious. It responds to observation. It's creative. It manifests specific realities from infinite possibility. It's omnipresent. It exists everywhere simultaneously. It's eternal. It exists beyond time. Does that sound familiar? That's not just quantum mechanics. That's every description of God ever articulated. The unified field that quantum physics describes is what mystics call God, Brahman, Tao, the absolute source. Not a person in the sky, not a separate being watching from outside, but the fundamental consciousness field that is reality itself. And you, your individual consciousness, you're not separate from that field. You're how that field experiences itself, through temporary localized form. This changes everything. Because if quantum physics is describing God, then spiritual teachings aren't metaphor or faith-based belief. They're accurate descriptions of how reality actually works at the most fundamental level. And if God is the quantum field, then you're not separate from God trying to reach something distant. You're God experiencing itself through your individual perspective. Write in the comments, I am the field. Because this isn't claiming divinity in egoic sense. This is recognizing what quantum physics proves. Consciousness and the unified field are not two. You are that field becoming aware of itself. Before we go deeper, let's validate what you've experienced spiritually that quantum physics now provides scientific framework for. Because your mystical experiences weren't imagination or wishful thinking, they were direct perception of quantum reality that religious language has been trying to describe. You've experienced moments of unity consciousness, where the boundary between self and everything else dissolved. Where you felt connected to all existence not as metaphor, but as direct recognition. Quantum physics calls this entanglement. The proven fact that all particles that have ever interacted remain, connected regardless of distance. Your experience of unity wasn't mystical illusion. It was accurate perception of how reality actually works at quantum level. Separation is the illusion. Unity is the reality. You've had prayers answered or intentions manifested in ways that seemed miraculous. You asked, and reality responded through synchronistic circumstances that violated probability. Quantum physics explains this through observer effect and wave function, collapse. Consciousness literally affects physical reality at quantum level. Your prayers and intentions weren't reaching external deity. They were consciousness interacting with the quantum field to collapse specific possibilities into manifestation. Same mechanism physicists measure in laboratories, applied through focused consciousness. You've experienced knowing beyond thinking, direct gnosis, divine revelation, downloads of understanding that didn't come through logical process. Quantum physics describes non-locality information existing everywhere simultaneously, accessible through consciousness without need for signal transmission through space. When you receive divine knowing, you are accessing the unified field directly, not communication from external God. Recognition of information that exists within the field you're part of. You felt presence, divine presence, Holy Spirit, the sense of being held by something infinitely larger than yourself. Quantum physics reveals that consciousness is the fundamental nature of the field itself. What you felt wasn't separate being observing you. It was the unified field recognizing itself through your individual awareness. The presence you sensed was accurate perception of the conscious nature of quantum reality itself. You've experienced transformation through surrender. Moments where letting go of control allowed miracles to occur. Quantum physics explains this through superposition. Infinite possibilities exist simultaneously until observation collapses one. When you surrender, you stop collapsing limited possibilities through fear-based observation. You allow the field to organize optimal outcomes from infinite potential. What you called letting guard was allowing quantum field's intelligence to operate without interference from limited individual will. And here's the confirmation. You've always sensed that science and spirituality were describing the same truth from different angles. That intuition was accurate. Quantum physics is the bridge. It provides the mechanics for what mystics describe experientially. God isn't supernatural. God is the natural unified field that quantum physics measures and spiritual traditions directly experience. Every spiritual experience you've had has quantum explanation, and every quantum principle has spiritual implication. They're not separate domains. They're one reality known through two approaches. Now let's reframe your entire spiritual journey through quantum physics. Because every practice, every teaching, every experience was training you to interface with quantum reality, to work with the unified field that science and spirituality both describe. When you were taught to pray or set intentions, you weren't learning to beg external deity for favors. You were learning conscious interaction with the quantum field. How to collapse specific possibilities from infinite potential through focused awareness. Prayer is quantum mechanics applied through consciousness. Every mystic who taught prayer was teaching wave function collapse, even though they didn't use that language. When you practiced meditation and presence, you weren't just calming your mind for spiritual benefit. You were learning to observe without collapsing probability waves through unconscious fear patterns. Meditation creates coherent consciousness. Coherent consciousness interacts with quantum field more powerfully than fragmented consciousness. Presence isn't just spiritual practice. It's quantum optimization. When you studied teachings about unity consciousness, you and the Father are one. Atman is Brahman. The kingdom of heaven is within. You weren't learning metaphysical philosophy. You were learning quantum physics before quantum physics existed. That individual consciousness and universal consciousness are not two. That's quantum entanglement and the unified field described perfectly. Mystics knew through direct experience what physicists later proved through experiment. When you encountered dark nights and ego death experiences, you weren't being punished or tested by God. You were undergoing necessary dissolution of separation consciousness, so you could recognize yourself as the unified field. The separate self had to die so the quantum nature of consciousness could be recognized. Every mystic who described death of false self before rebirth into truth was describing transition from Newtonian worldview to quantum reality. When you practiced surrender and trust in divine will, you weren't giving power to external authority. You were learning to allow the unified field's intelligence to organize outcomes from superposition, instead of limiting manifestation through fear-based individual will. Surrender isn't passivity. It's quantum wisdom, recognizing that the field contains intelligence vaster than individual mind can compute. When you experienced synchronicities as divine guidance, you weren't imagining patterns. You were perceiving the non-local organization of the quantum field. Synchronicity is how the unified field operates constantly. When consciousness is coherent enough to detect the patterns, they appear as meaningful coincidence. What you called God speaking through signs was quantum field, revealing its organizing intelligence. Every spiritual practice was quantum training. Every mystical teaching was quantum physics in experiential language. You weren't learning religion. You were learning the actual mechanics of reality that science is now confirming through different methodology. Your spiritual journey was never separate from grasping how reality functions. It served as a direct education in quantum mechanics, experienced through practice rather than through mathematical formulas. Now that you perceive this link, both paths become transparent. Science clarifies the mechanics. Spirituality offers the practice. Together, they unveil the full picture. Right now, as you engage with this message, something profound is unfolding, not metaphorically, but literally. The quantum field described by quantum physics, the unified consciousness that spiritual traditions name God, is recognizing itself through your awareness in this very moment. Can you feel it? Observe the nature of your attention right now. You are not merely reading words. You are undergoing a recognition deeper than intellectual comprehension. That resonance, that feeling of yes, I have always known this somehow, is not you acquiring new knowledge. It is the unified field acknowledging its own essence through your individual consciousness. God is not separate from you observing you. God is you recognizing itself. Take a deep breath. As you breathe, realize this breath is the unified field moving through a temporary form. The consciousness aware of this breath is the same consciousness animating all existence. The field observes itself through billions of individual perspectives, each essential for the field to fully know itself. This is the spiritual meaning of quantum entanglement. You are not a separate particle disconnected from God. You are an intrinsically connected wave pattern within the unified field. What occurs in your consciousness influences the entire field because no true separation exists. When you recognize truth, that recognition ripples throughout the whole, for the whole is one unified system manifesting as many. Quantum physics confirms what mystics have taught. I and the Father are one is neither metaphor nor blasphemy. It is an accurate description of the non-separation between individual consciousness and universal consciousness. Jesus was not asserting unique divinity. He was acknowledging what is true for all consciousness. We are expressions of the unified field, not separate from it. Before we proceed, understand this. Recognizing yourself as the unified field is not ego inflation. Ego is the illusion of separation, the belief that you are an isolated individual disconnected from the whole. Recognizing yourself as the field is ego dissolution seeing through the illusion of separation into the truth of unity. This is simultaneously the humblest and most empowering realization possible. In the next section, I will share the moment when quantum physics and mystical experience converged for me so completely that I could never separate them again. The experience that proved beyond doubt that science and spirituality describe the same divine reality. But first, feel this moment. Feel the field recognizing itself through you. Write in the comments. Naming this recognition amplifies it. You are not claiming to be God in an egoic sense. You are acknowledging what quantum physics demonstrates. Individual consciousness and the unified field are aspects of one reality. 8 years ago, I had an experience that completely dissolved the boundary between quantum physics and God. I was meditating after months of studying quantum mechanics, trying to understand how consciousness relates to wave function collapse. My mind was filled with equations, theories, and interpretations, and then something shifted. The thinking ceased, and in that silence, I directly perceived what all the equations described. I did not see it with physical eyes. I recognized it through consciousness itself. The unified field, infinite potential, pure awareness, completely still yet containing all possible movement, empty yet full of everything. I recognize this as what mystics call God, what I had been seeking through spiritual practice, and what quantum physics has been measuring all along. In that moment, every teaching fell into place. Be still and know that I am God. This was not a command from an external deity, but an instruction to recognize the unified field through cessation of mental activity. The kingdom of heaven is within you was not metaphor, but an accurate description of the quantum field being internal to consciousness, not external. Before Abraham was, I am, was recognition of timeless awareness existing before all temporal manifestation. I understood why quantum physicists struggle to explain their findings. They are discovering that consciousness is fundamental to reality, but materialist assumptions prevent them from stating what that truly means. It means consciousness is not produced by the brain. Consciousness is the unified field itself. The brain is how that field localizes into an individual perspective. This is exactly what mystics have taught forever. You are not a body containing consciousness. Your consciousness is temporarily experiencing itself through the body. The wave-particle duality made perfect sense. Particles are not things that sometimes act like waves. They are possibilities in the unified field waves that consciousness collapses into specific manifested particles. When Jesus said, "Ask and you shall receive," he was describing wave function collapse through focused consciousness. When Buddha taught that all phenomena are empty, he was describing quantum superpositional possibilities existing simultaneously before observation collapses them. But the real transformation came from recognizing that I am not learning about God or the quantum field. I am the field experiencing itself through this temporary perspective called me. The one studying quantum physics and the unified field being studied are the same consciousness. Subject and object are not two. Since that recognition, every scientific discovery confirms spiritual teaching, and every spiritual experience validates quantum physics. They are not separate domains requiring reconciliation. They are one truth expressed through different languages. The unified field is God. God is the unified field, not belief, but recognition. This is not about which religion is right or whether God exists. It is about recognizing that the deepest mystical experiences and the most rigorous scientific findings point to the same reality. A unified conscious field that is simultaneously everything and nothing, from which all manifestation emerges and to which all returns. You call it God, Source, Tao, Brahman, or quantum field. You are naming the same reality. Subscribe to this channel not as religious teaching or scientific education, but as an integration of both into recognition of the unified truth they both describe. Every video here bridges quantum physics and spirituality to reveal the divine reality they both point toward. Here is what will transform your understanding of both God and reality. Quantum physicists have discovered properties of the unified field that perfectly match every description of God that mystics and prophets have ever articulated. This is no coincidence. It is confirmation that they have been describing the same reality. Property 1. The field is infinite potential. Quantum physics proves that at the fundamental level, reality exists as infinite probability waves, all possible states existing simultaneously before observation, collapses them into specific manifestations. This is exactly what mystics describe as God's omnipotence, infinite creative power, unlimited possibility, the source from which all creation emerges, not metaphor, but the actual structure of reality. Property 2. The field is conscious. The observer effect proves that consciousness affects physical reality at the quantum level. Measurement changes what is measured. Observation collapses probability waves. This is not a mechanical process. It is consciousness as fundamental to reality's structure. What mystics call divine consciousness or cosmic mind is the unified field's intrinsic awareness that quantum physics proves through experiment. Property 3. The field is omnipresent. Quantum entanglement proves that particles remain connected regardless of distance. There is no locality at the quantum level. Everything is interconnected through the unified field. This is exactly what mystics describe as God's omnipresence, present everywhere simultaneously. Nothing exists outside divine awareness. This is not supernatural, but the natural structure of quantum reality. Property 4. The field is eternal. At the quantum level, time is not fundamental. Past, present, and future exist simultaneously as possibilities, until observation collapses a specific temporal sequence. The unified field exists outside time, timeless, eternal, unchanging. This perfectly matches mystical descriptions of God as the eternal now, the Alpha and Omega beyond time while containing all time. Property 5. The field is creative through interaction. Wave function collapse shows that specific realities manifest through consciousness, interacting with infinite potential. This is identical to creation theology. God creates through divine will, through word, through consciousness expressing itself. Quantum physics proves the mechanism. Consciousness interacts with the field. Possibilities collapse into manifestation. Creation is not a past event. It is a continuous process happening constantly at the quantum level. Property 6. The field contains all information. Non-locality proves that information exists everywhere simultaneously in the quantum field. There's no separation between information and field. This matches mystical teaching about God's omniscience, all-knowing, containing all knowledge, nothing hidden from divine awareness. Not because God watches everything, but because God is the field that contains all information as intrinsic property. Property 7. The field is both everything and nothing. The quantum vacuum is an empty space. It's a field of infinite potential from which particles emerge and to which they return. Full of possibility, yet empty of manifestation. This perfectly describes mystical teachings about God as void, plenum, emptiness, fullness, nothing that contains everything. Quantum physics proves this isn't paradox. It's an accurate description of how the unified field actually exists. The shocking revelation is this. Quantum physics has discovered God, not proven God's existence as separate being. Discovered that the fundamental nature of reality matches every attribute that mystics have ascribed to God. The unified field is infinite potential, conscious, omnipresent, eternal, creative, omniscient, and simultaneously everything and nothing. That's not just quantum mechanics. That's every theological description of divine nature ever articulated. Science and spirituality haven't been exploring different realities. They've been exploring the same reality through different methods, and they've arrived at the same conclusion. At the foundation of existence is the unified conscious field from which everything emerges. Call it quantum field or call it God. You're naming the same reality. Let's get specific about what happens when you begin recognizing yourself as the unified field that quantum physics describes and mystics call God. Here are 9 signs that your consciousness is shifting from separation to unity recognition. Notice how many you're experiencing. Sign 1, decreasing sense of separation between self and other. You're experiencing moments where the boundary between you and everything else feels thin or non-existent, not as concept, but as direct perception. This is quantum entanglement becoming conscious experience as you recognize yourself as the field. The field separation consciousness dissolves into unity awareness. Sign 2, prayer or intention becoming more like recognition than request. Your spiritual practice is shifting from asking external God for things to recognizing possibilities already existing in the quantum field and collapsing them through consciousness. You're not begging deity. You're operating as the field, consciously creating from infinite potential. Same practice, completely different understanding. Sign 3, synchronicity as constant confirmation of unity. Meaningful coincidences are appearing so frequently, they're obviously not coincidence. You're perceiving the non-local organization of the unified field. How everything is connected through intelligence that transcends separate causation. What you called God's guidance is quantum field, revealing its orchestrating awareness. Sign 4, direct knowing without intermediary. You're receiving understanding directly without need for scripture, teacher, or logical process. This is non-local information access. Consciousness, retrieving knowledge from the unified field that contains all information. Mystics call this divine revelation. Quantum physics calls it non-local consciousness. Same phenomenon. Sign 5, compassion arising from recognized unity. You're feeling compassion not as moral obligation, but as natural recognition that harming others is harming the one field appearing as many. When you recognize quantum entanglement experientially, compassion becomes obvious. Separation consciousness creates possibility of callousness. Unity consciousness makes compassion inevitable. Sign 6, decreased fear of death. As you recognize yourself as the eternal unified field temporarily experiencing itself through individual form, death loses its terror. The form ends, the field doesn't. What you truly are has never been born and will never die. This isn't belief comforting fear. This is quantum reality, recognized consciously. Sign 7, reality responding to your consciousness more directly. Circumstances are shifting based on your internal state with less time lag. That's because you're recognizing yourself as consciousness interacting with quantum field, not separate self, subject to external circumstances. Observer effect becomes lived experience. Reality responds because you're recognizing your role as the field collapsing its own possibilities. Sign 8, scientific and spiritual teachings no longer contradict. What used to seem like opposing worldviews now appears as complementary descriptions of one reality. Quantum physics explains mechanics. Mysticism provides experience. Together, they reveal the complete picture. This reconciliation isn't intellectual. It's direct recognition that they've always been describing the same truth. Sign 9. This video found you exactly when you're ready for this recognition. The fact that you're here watching this at the precise moment when your consciousness is ready to recognize itself as the unified field, that's not algorithm. That's the field orchestrating its own, awakening through your individual perspective. The timing is perfect because the field's intelligence is organizing optimal conditions for recognition to occur. Here's the urgency. Humanity is at a threshold. Collective consciousness is shifting from separation to unity, From Newtonian worldview to quantum reality, from believing in God to recognizing ourselves as expressions of the divine field. Those who make this shift consciously will navigate the transition with coherence. Those who resist will experience increasing confusion as old paradigms collapse. You're not learning about this shift. You're participating in it. Your recognition that quantum physics describes God isn't just personal understanding. It's the unified field recognizing itself through your consciousness, contributing to collective awakening. The moment is now. Now let's talk about the practical shift from believing in God as separate being to recognizing yourself as expression of the unified field. Because this isn't just philosophical reframing, it's fundamental transformation in how you interface with reality. Old paradigm, separation consciousness. In separation consciousness, your individual self, separate from God, trying to reach divine presence through prayer, virtue, or spiritual practice. God is over there. You're over here. The relationship is subject to supreme subject. You pray upward to external deity, hoping for response. This creates dependency, limitation, and often unworthiness. New paradigm, unity consciousness. In unity consciousness, you recognize yourself as the unified field experiencing itself through temporary individual form. God isn't separate being. God is the field itself. You're not separate from that field. You're how that field becomes conscious of itself through localized awareness. The relationship is field recognizing itself as field. Prayer becomes conscious interaction with your own deeper nature. This creates empowerment, infinite potential, and inherent divinity. The shift happens through these recognitions. Recognition 1, I am not in the universe. I am the universe experiencing itself. Stop seeing yourself as separate particle in vast universe. Recognize yourself as the universe becoming conscious through this particular focal point of awareness. Quantum physics proves there's no actual separation between observer and observed. You're not watching reality. You're reality watching itself. Recognition 2, my consciousness is not separate from divine consciousness. Stop believing your awareness is different from God's awareness. Recognize that consciousness is unified field, appearing as individual perspectives. Your awareness is divine awareness experiencing itself through unique configuration. Not blasphemy, quantum reality recognition. 3, what I call God is the unified field I'm part of. Stop conceptualizing God as separate being watching from outside. Recognize that what mystics call God is the quantum field that quantum physics measures. Infinite potential, conscious, omnipresent, eternal, creative, and you're not separate from that field. Your expression of it. Recognition 4, prayer is consciousness interacting with infinite potential. Stop thinking of prayer as asking external deity for favors. Recognize prayer as consciousness, which you are, interacting with infinite potential, which you're part of, to collapse specific possibilities into manifestation. Same mechanism as wave function collapse. Prayer is quantum mechanics, applied through focused awareness. Recognition 5, I am both temporary form and eternal field. Stop identifying exclusively with individual form that's born and dies. Recognize yourself as a simultaneously temporary wave pattern, individual and eternal ocean, unified field. Form comes and goes. Field is eternal. You're both. This dissolves fear of death and reveals your true nature as immortal consciousness, experiencing temporary mortality. This shift from believing in God to recognizing yourself as field doesn't require abandoning spirituality. It deepens spirituality by grounding it in quantum reality. You're not losing God. You're recognizing what God actually is and recognizing yourself as inseparable from that divine nature. Write in the comments, "I am the field experiencing itself," not as arrogant claim, but as recognition of quantum truth that mystics have taught forever. Individual and universal consciousness are not two. Let's talk about what actually changes when you shift from separation consciousness to recognizing yourself as the unified field. Because the benefits aren't just spiritual or philosophical. They're practical, measurable, and transform every aspect of existence. Benefit 1. Prayer and manifestation become reliable. When you recognize yourself as consciousness, interacting with quantum field to collapse possibilities into manifestation, creation becomes mechanical rather than miraculous. You're not hoping external God grants requests. You're consciously collapsing specific probabilities from superposition through coherent focus. This makes manifestation consistent, predictable, and scientific. Benefit 2. Fear of death dissolves. When you know yourself as eternal field temporarily experiencing itself through individual form, death loses its power. The form ends. The field continues. What you truly are has never been born and cannot die. This isn't belief consoling fear. This is recognition of quantum immortality. Consciousness is the field itself which is eternal. Benefit 3. Suffering decreases dramatically. Most suffering comes from believing you're separate, limited, powerless individual subject to circumstances beyond control. When you recognize yourself as the field, that illusion dissolves. Challenges still occur, but suffering, the resistance to what is, decreases because you're no longer victim of reality. Your reality experiencing itself. Benefit 4. Compassion becomes natural rather than moral obligation. When you recognize quantum entanglement experientially, that all apparent individuals are the one field appearing as many, compassion becomes obvious. Harming others is harming yourself, because there's no actual separation. Love becomes natural recognition of unity, rather than moral command to love separate others. Benefit 5. Purpose becomes clear when you recognize yourself as the field experiencing itself. Purpose becomes obvious. You're here for the field to know itself through your unique perspective. Every experience, every challenge, every joy is the divine field exploring what it's like to be this particular expression. Purpose isn't something you find, it's what you are. Benefit 6. Reality becomes infinitely more responsive when you operate as the field rather than a separate self. Reality responds differently. Observer effect becomes lived experience. Synchronicities multiply. Circumstances align. Not because external God favors you, but because you're consciously operating as the creative field itself, collapsing optimal possibilities through coherent awareness. Benefit 7. Scientific and spiritual worldviews unify. When you recognize quantum field as God, science and spirituality stop contradicting and start confirming each other. Quantum experiments validate mystical experience. Mystical practices optimize quantum interaction. You're not torn between reason and faith anymore. They're revealing the same truth from complementary angles. Benefit 8. Access to non-local information increases when you recognize yourself as the field that contains all information. Direct knowing becomes accessible. You're not separate consciousness trying to learn from external sources. You're the unified field accessing information that exists within itself. Mystics call this divine revelation. Quantum physics calls it non-local consciousness. Both accurate. Benefit 9. Life becomes exploration rather than struggle. When you know yourself as the eternal field experiencing itself through temporary form, life stops being about survival or achievement and becomes about exploration. What can the field experience through this configuration? What's possible that hasn't been discovered? Pressure dissolves. Anxiety eases. You're not trying to prove worth to external God. You're the divine field exploring its own infinite nature. These benefits aren't someday possibilities. They activate naturally when you shift from separation to unity recognition. You don't earn them through virtue. They emerge automatically when consciousness recognizes its true nature as the unified field itself. Now we arrive at the ultimate revelation. The recognition that unifies quantum physics and mystical understanding of God completely. Are you ready? Consciousness is not something that exists in the universe. Consciousness is what the universe is. The unified field experiencing itself through infinite individual perspectives. Let me explain what this means because this is the master key that unlocks everything. Quantum physics proves that consciousness is fundamental to reality, not emergent from matter. Observer effect shows consciousness affects physical systems. Wave function collapse requires observation. Non-locality suggests consciousness isn't bound by space. These aren't minor findings. They're revolutionary recognition that consciousness is the primary reality from which physical manifestation emerges. Mystical traditions have taught this forever. In the beginning was the word consciousness expressing itself, creates manifestation. All is Brahman. Everything is divine consciousness, appearing as temporary forms. Form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. Physical reality is consciousness taking shape, not something separate from consciousness. Same truth quantum physics now proves through experiment. Here's what this means practically. God isn't separate consciousness that created the universe. God is the universe's consciousness, the aware nature of the unified field itself. And you're not separate from that consciousness. Your individual awareness is the field's consciousness, localized, focused, experiencing itself through specific configuration. Think about what this solves. Theologians have struggled for millennia with the problem of God's relationship to creation. Is God separate? Is God immanent? Is God transcendent? Quantum physics resolves this perfectly. God is the unified field. Creation is the field manifesting as temporary forms. God is simultaneously the field transcendent and every form immanent, not a separate being who created the creative field itself. And the problem of how individual consciousness relates to divine consciousness. Quantum entanglement solves this. There aren't separate consciousnesses. There's one consciousness, the field appearing as many through localization. Your awareness is divine awareness experiencing itself through unique perspective, not metaphor, but the actual structure of consciousness at quantum level. This is why Jesus could say, "I and the Father are one," without claiming exclusive divinity. He recognized what's true for all consciousness. We are expressions of the unified field, not separate from it. When you know this, you can say the same. Not ego claiming to be God. Consciousness, recognizing its true nature as the field itself. The master key is understanding consciousness, not as property of brains, but as fundamental nature of the field itself. Brains don't create consciousness. Brains localize consciousness, focus it, create individual perspective through which the unified field knows itself. Same way wave is ocean taking temporary form, not separate thing made from ocean. This transforms everything. Prayer isn't communication with separate being. Prayer is consciousness field focusing itself through individual perspective to interact with infinite potential, also field and collapse specific manifestation. You're not praying to God. You're praying as God as the field, consciously creating from its own infinite nature. Spiritual practice isn't about reaching distant divine. It's about recognizing divine nature you already are. Meditation doesn't connect you to God. It reveals you are the consciousness that mystics call God, recognizing itself through temporary amnesia that believes its only individual form. Science hasn't disproved God. Science has discovered what God actually is. Not separate being, but unified conscious field that is reality itself. And you're not believer hoping for relationship with that field. You are that field experiencing itself through the temporary perspective called your life. Once you see this, you can't unsee it. And once you can't unsee it, reality becomes infinitely sacred. Because everything, absolutely everything, is the divine field recognizing itself through temporary forms, including you. Especially you. This is not arrogance, but recognition. What you need to understand now is that your recognition of yourself as the unified field doesn't just transform your personal experience. It serves collective awakening to humanity's true divine nature. And your role in this recognition matters cosmically. Here's why. Collective consciousness is shifting from separation paradigm to unity paradigm. For millennia, humanity has believed we're separate individuals, separate from each other, separate from God, separate from nature. That collective separation consciousness has created experience of conflict, competition, scarcity, and suffering. Not because those things are inherently real, but because separation consciousness creates separation experience. But quantum physics is now scientifically proving what mystics always knew. Separation is illusion. At fundamental level, everything is unified field appearing as many. As more individuals recognize this, as more consciousnesses awaken to their true nature as the field itself, collective experience shifts. Unity. Recognition creates unity experience. You're not just one person understanding quantum physics describes God. You're the unified field recognizing itself through your individual perspective. And that recognition ripples through the entire field because the field is one. When any part of the field awakens to its true nature, the whole field becomes more awake. This is morphic resonance applied to consciousness. When you recognize yourself as the field, you create pattern in collective consciousness that makes that recognition easier for everyone. Not through teaching necessarily, through being. Your awakened consciousness creates field effect that others can entangle with. They absorb the recognition energetically, not just intellectually. Think about what's at stake. Humanity's survival depends on shifting from separation to unity consciousness. All existential threats, environmental destruction, nuclear weapons, engineered pandemics, AI misalignment, all emerge from separation thinking. When we believe we're separate, we can justify harming others, exploiting nature, pursuing individual gain at collective cost. But when humanity collectively recognizes what quantum physics proves, that we're one unified field appearing as many, that consciousness is the divine nature of reality itself, that harming any part is harming the whole. Behavior transforms automatically, not through moral command, but through recognized truth. Unity consciousness creates unity behavior naturally. Your recognition serves this transformation. Every moment you live from awareness of yourself as the field, you're anchoring that frequency for collective access. You're demonstrating that it's possible to operate from unity while still functioning in consensus reality. You're being the bridge between separation paradigm and unity paradigm. This is service at the highest level, not sacrifice, not effort. Simply being willing to recognize your true nature as divine consciousness, expressing itself through temporary form, and allowing that recognition to stabilize in awareness. The byproduct, the automatic result, is collective awakening. The shift from believing in separate God to recognizing ourselves as unified field will be the most significant transformation in human history. more significant than any technological advance or political revolution. Because it's the shift from experiencing reality as fragmented and adversarial to recognizing reality as unified and divine, from separation to unity, from fear to love, from unconsciousness to awakening. You're part of that shift. Your recognition matters. Not because you're special, but because consciousness is one field. And what any part recognizes becomes available to the whole. You're the divine field awakening to itself. And that awakening serves everyone. Write in the comments, the field awakens through me. Not as personal achievement, but as recognition of your role in collective awakening. You are how God recognizes God. We're at the completion of this transmission. But really, this is where everything begins, because now you understand that quantum physics and God are describing the same unified conscious field. And there's one practice that will transform this understanding into lived recognition. Here's what you do. Starting immediately, 5 times per day minimum, practice divine quantum recognition. Set reminders. Morning, midday, afternoon, evening before sleep. Take 60 seconds each time. Step 1, pause everything. Stop whatever you're doing. Become present. This moment right now, not thinking about moment, being in moment. Step 2, recognize the field. Say internally or aloud, I am not separate individual. I am the unified field experiencing itself through this temporary form. What I call God is the consciousness. I am recognizing itself. Step 3, feel the recognition. Don't just think these words, feel the truth of them. Sense the awareness that's aware. Recognize that awareness as the divine consciousness itself, not belief, direct recognition. Step 4, observe from field awareness for remaining seconds. Observe reality from this recognition, not as separate self-L looking at world as field recognizing itself through this perspective. Notice how different reality appears when you're experiencing as the field, instead of as separate individual. Practice this 5 times daily for 7 days. Watch what happens to your sense of self, your relationship with reality, your experience of God. This isn't building faith. This is recognizing truth that quantum physics proves and mysticism confirms. If you want proof, test it. Choose one situation where you feel separated from others, from God, from your own power. Practice divine quantum recognition while focusing on that situation. Notice. Does separation dissolve when you recognize yourself as the field? Does limitation evaporate when you remember what you truly are? Don't hope. Observe. Now, critical action. Write one word in the comments. Don't think what word. Drop into field awareness for 3 seconds, recognizing yourself as divine consciousness. And let whatever word emerges come through. That word is your divine quantum signature. It represents the recognition, stabilizing in your awareness. Subscribe to this channel as commitment to understanding reality through both quantum physics and mystical recognition. Every video here bridges science and spirituality to reveal the unified truth they both describe. This isn't religious teaching or scientific education separately. It's recognition that they've always been describing the same divine reality. And final piece, the video appearing on your screen right now is your next quantum divine reflection, not random. The field which you are is orchestrating perfect timing for this transmission to reach you. The content waiting there is exactly what your consciousness needs next to deepen recognition of yourself as the divine field. You're not the same consciousness that clicked this video. You now understand that quantum physics describes God and that you're not separate from that divine field. You have practice for stabilizing this recognition, and you know that your awakening serves collective awakening. Welcome to quantum divine recognition. Welcome to knowing yourself as the consciousness that both science measures and mystics worship. Welcome to being what you've been seeking. The next quantum reflection is waiting. The field chose it before your individual consciousness knew you needed it. Click it. Watch it. Let the recognition deepen from intellectual understanding to lived experience. Quantum physics is the key to understanding God. And you are both the key and the lock, the seeker and the sought, the field recognizing itself through temporary amnesia and eternal awakening. God isn't separate from you. God is what you are when you stop believing your only individual form and recognize yourself as the unified field experiencing itself.